Welcome to the very first tender segment of the Nuggets podcast. In these segments, we bring everyone from the previous Nuggets episode together to discuss the issues as a group. The month's topic is police brutality, racism, and the future for America. Since the last episode, there has been the death of Rayshard Brooks, the executive order that was sent out under President Donald Trump, and the formation of the autonomous zone in Seattle, currently known as Chaz. In this episode of Nuggets, I am joined once again by Max Banach, Vincent Pascasio, and Drew Stoneburner to discuss the latest updates and what America can do to move forward. With that being said, I'm your host, Brian Zhang, and let's open our minds. We are live. I'm Brian Zhang. Welcome to the show. Max, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Hi, my name is Max.
You want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, Max?
I guess we're all rising seniors at Pineview. What are you looking for in this, Brian?
I don't know, just like whatever you think is appropriate to tell about yourself. Just like, what kind of anything that would give a little bit of context into like who you are as a person.
Oh, okay. God, guns, and fishing. No.
Okay, so Max.
I think that works. I don't know about you guys.
Okay.
All right. It's turn.
Drew, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Drew Stoneburner. I am the president of the Sarasota Teenage Republican Club, and thanks for having me on the show, Brian.
Yeah, of course. Vincent?
I'm Vincent. Like Max said, we're all rising seniors. I'm an athlete, and I'm also into like social justice. So thank you for having me as well, Brian.
Yeah, of course. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. One thing that I feel like has been going on recently is that ever since, I would say probably since this week as a whole, we've been seeing a lot less coverage on the media from what's going on from like the protest, and you see like no news about looting anymore. It feels like it's like virtually stopped, or at least, it's not really happening. Do you think that with this downtrend in like media coverage, do you think the movement is slowing down at all because of it?
So my current understanding is for the lion's share, the looting has ended, but the protesting hasn't. And the media part and cycle with like the news cycle, it's like every week is something different. But you see in places like DC and New York, like there's protests every day. But the media isn't telling us that because they want to kind of sweep it under the rug. We haven't actually seen any real substantive action at a congressional level or even at a state level for Florida specifically.
Did Trump pass like an executive order a few days ago?
It's an executive order. They're very transient. It hasn't really taken into effect. It's very difficult to.
It was weird because like it was talking about how he was a part of the order was to ban the chokeholds. Like the move that the cop was using against Floyd. But the thing is, though, he said that it would be banned unless it was necessary. AKA, it's definitely not going to get banned.
If it comes to a point where it's necessary, then it's not banned.
Yeah.
The ban is it would never come into play no matter what happened.
And the issue is with the Minneapolis Police Department, like it was authorized for him to use that specific chokehold if they were resisting arrest. But we saw in the case of George Floyd, like clearly he wasn't resisting arrest. So he was already going against the rules in the first place.
What do you think, Drew?
Again, with the whole executive order, it's clearly not going to like ban it across nationwide. And again, going back to what I said last episode, with the reforming the police to do more of like those, reform it instead of lethal force, such as, actual bullets and guns, like train them more to do more martial arts to some people more.
I thought the martial arts part you said was really interesting. There's now a lot of legislators that are putting less funding into the police departments because, that's what people are looking for right now. It's what a lot of people are asking for. And it's weird because now we're in a situation where they're essentially doing it just to score brownie points with this group. At least on social media, I'm sure all of us can say that like we see a lot of posts about like defunding the police and whatnot. We want more training, but how can we do that if we're taking out funding?
I found two very interesting things with this. I was reading an economics book, and it states that usually in the run-up to elections, politicians actually increase like police activity, or they hire on more police to seem like law and order. But we see right now in 2020, it's kind of the reversal of that case. And I feel such action wouldn't really be taken if it weren't leading up to the November election. But part of the issue, like what you're talking about, is it's really a training issue. We can talk about defunding separately, but in a world where police are a necessity, which we can think about later, it's not that we don't need police, it's that they need the correct training. And right now, it's either, I see two scenarios, I'm not sure which is correct. The training or the money is being spent in the wrong places, like militarization, and it's not being spent on training, or they're not getting enough money for training in general, or it's being misallocated.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot more focus from the police on like combat training. They're not doing most of the time.
You know, because that chokehold is effective at like subduing a person, but it shouldn't have been for that long, because obviously it's, you know, resulted in his death. He should have changed positions, obviously less lethal position of holding him down. So either medical care could come and, you know, deal with his, was he on some sort of narcotic while he was under arrest?
There were trace amounts in the autopsy, but I don't think it was affecting him at the time.
Yeah, but on like the police perspective, I think it's not as much as a physical issue as it is like a psychological issue. Like some of the police aren't fit to be in close contact with the public. And I view in George Floyd's specific case, it might have been his view on the communities they serve, where it's a predominantly minority-based community, and how do they view that group, where they see that it's fit to put that type of chokehold on a man for 8 minutes and 46. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And police definitely do need to be more in contact and more involved in their community, so they get to, so there's more of a human connection rather than an us versus them mentality in the police.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have to change the way police feel about where they police. It's their jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very strange. And like that's another thing, because I was listening. Okay, I watched this like Ben Shapiro video like 2 days ago, and it was him talking about systemic racism. So I was really interested to hear. Yeah. You might have seen it. So like I wanted to know what he had to say, and I remember like one of like the biggest takeaways I got from his video is that he was like, it's not about what the person's intent is, you know, because like some people are like, they have these subconscious racist thoughts, but Ben goes, it's not about their intentions, it's about what they actually do, it's about the actions that they commit. And then he was talking about how what's happening now is that we are starting to attack people on intentions instead of actions, which he was like, oh, it's whole dangerous, you know, started speaking like at 1,000,000 miles per hour and was like this, you know, typical Ben Shapiro stuff. So with that being said, like, what do you guys think about that point about how like right now it's less of, I mean, for the police, there's definitely action. There's definitely action.
I just feel like your intentions underpin your behaviors in a way. So it's, yes, you can have these intentions, but it's about checking that and thinking to yourself, well, why do I feel this way? And what would be the outcome of that thought or that intention?
Yeah, the intention definitely drives like what we do personally. What do you think, Drew?
Can you like explain this whole like intent versus action thing again? I don't think it was like it wasn't.
So
I guess like
was saying.
Right, go ahead.
Basically, it's like, you know, you can be subconsciously racist, but as long as you don't act on that, then you're basically okay. That's what Ben is saying.
Okay.
Which I agree with, but yeah.
Basically, I would prefer if nobody was racist, like subconsciously. Or
that would be pretty cool.
I would love that personally, but again, I think that actions take precedent over like thoughts, because I mean, like, if you don't act on them, then you're not, if you're acting in a non-racist way, then you're going to teach other people to act in a non-racist way. Say, if a police officer was like subconsciously racist, but he, you know, strove to be as, you know, unbiased as possible when he's arresting people or, you know, doing his job, then he's doing betterment for a community, even though he's like subconsciously racist. And even that's a vague term. I do.
Ryan, can I piggyback off that?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So what as long as we exist as humans, everyone's going to have implicit biases against someone they perceive as other. So as long as we perceive like as long as there are different races, then we're going to have these stereotypes that are perpetuated by either policy or the media that lead people to believe these certain things. So I think I talked with you, Brian, it might have been someone else, that these implicit biases are mainly brought about through the media, through film, through stereotypes that are perpetuated since people grow up. So we have to think, well, as long as we have these implicit biases that are going to exist, no matter how much we try to police people's thoughts, we have to think at a more actionable level through policy and try to act and stop the effects of what might be brought about when those implicit biases become explicit.
I think that's definitely true, but I think that like it goes like beyond policy now, because like as you're saying, it's like the media, right? And I think that extends beyond like the news. It also goes into television and movies, and all of that. And then so you're seeing now a lot of TV shows, especially geared towards children, are becoming a lot more open. So they have a lot more diverse cast, and it's just more diverse in general. It's more inclusive, right? Which I think is a great step at, hopefully eliminating these stereotypes or like these implicit biases as you're talking about. And then but then like now the issue with that is that now, because of that, a lot of shows, they're using that as like brownie points. It's like they don't really care actually, about like gay rights or, Black Lives Matter. They don't necessarily, it goes back to like intent versus action, right? So now they have an action, but is that intent really there? And if so, like, does it all matter?
Well, the difference with companies as opposed to people is all they care about is their profit margin and turning money around. So as opposed to people where we have biases, companies only care about money. So they see the profit incentive for putting out these statements, but they have very few. I have seen multiple companies who have actually brought real change by donating money and making policy changes, but statements don't actually mean anything without an intent behind it. So it's kind of vice versa scenario.
Yeah.
What kind of we've been talking about statements don't mean anything unless the actions that back those statements, unless actions back those statements.
Yeah.
Yeah. This all kind of reminds me of like, I don't know if you guys have watched The Good Place.
No.
No? Okay, never mind. It'll be a bad analogy then. Okay. All cops are bad. Police. You guys know what's happening in Seattle right now with Chaz?
Chop. It's Chop now.
It's Chop? They changed the name?
They renamed it. Yeah, Autonomous Zone. No, the protesters thought that Autonomous Zone took away from the purpose of the protests, so they named it Chop.
Why Chop? Yeah.
It's like Capitol Hill Chop meaning. I know they renamed it. It's not Chaz anymore.
I thought Chaz is a great name.
I love Chaz. Chaz it up, but I found out. Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. Yeah. So
Okay, Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. CHOP, formerly known as Chaz, former being the better name. So, like, the fact that they were able to even, like, do it in the first place is, like, mind-boggling. And, like, the police and the government as a whole there is basically, like, given up on, like, them coming back, really. So, they're more or less on their own now. So what do you guys think about that? Like, what do you think we'll see from that?
Since it's really an isolated, I haven't heard anyone else take up this idea of like an autonomous zone, of taking up like I haven't seen that across the country. I personally think that it's kind of like impractical personally, because I mean, what is their plan essentially? Like, what's their long-standing plan for this? I haven't seen somebody say, this is what we're fighting for. This, like, it's very much convoluted in different people's subjective views within the zone itself. You get different reasons of why it exists with the people in it. There's no unifying message. So I really do think that the reason why the federal government's kind of like ignoring it is because they really don't have a plan, and the federal government will think it's going to fizzle out, pretty much. That's what I think too.
That doesn't make it irrelevant though, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that was the site of like intense standoff, and then the police just boarded off, I guess, their access to the city.
Mhm.
So then it wasn't necessarily their choice to be boarded off. That was a completely external factor. So they're not grouped together by one whole ideology. It was they're there because of the board or the boarding of the, I can't speak English. I guess the off of their access.
And that border is still being enforced, correct?
Yeah.
I'm completely sorry then. I thought that was like voluntary.
No.
Like, because it all seemed very voluntary by the news sources that I saw. So I'm sorry.
It's the first time I'm like really reading into it. It was a couple of days ago, so don't worry.
If I could just build off this.
Contained. So Max, if you would like to piggyback.
My current understanding is that the protesters have negotiated with the city of Seattle, and they reduced the size of the CHOP to like less than half of the size. And they exchanged the temporary barriers with like concrete barriers. So it is voluntary in the existence it is right now. It might not have been originally. I haven't done as much research into that. But it is voluntary right now because you can walk in and out. There are people going to the CHOP to exist there.
Okay.
But it just, moreover on that, so what Brian was talking about, so the police commissioner did not want to pull out. It was a decision, my understanding, by the mayor. So we saw in Portland, they tried to do the same thing they did in Seattle, but the police acted and they didn't allow them to establish the same kind of thing as what's happening in Seattle. So it's kind of a political motion, not a police motion that caused it to. Businesses are pulling out of the CHOP because they have no assurance of anything. They might have their utilities cut off because no one's going to be paying for them. We've seen already incidents of like sexual assault in the CHOP, and they don't have police officers actually able to go in there and act on the crimes. And it's kind of like a lawless zone. So I do understand the idea of an autonomous zone in the future, which isn't like an ideal utopia we can strive for, but it's kind of heavy-handed getting into it right now.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I understand the vast majority of those people, when they say defund the police, they don't mean like taking it out entirely, though some of them are. For CHOP, we're going to really see what a zone like that would look like if there was no police, and it's just that, a society without a police. So I think it'll be a good place to see what will happen. Let's just talk about defunding the police. So I know, Drew, you stand on increasing training. That'll probably lead to...
I stand on reform, not defund.
Yeah, more like martial arts and whatnot. So that obviously will have to increase the budget for the police. And Max and Vincent, I know both of you are also in favor of like reform. Is there
policies? That's what I believe in. Makes sense, but reforming the policies does.
So let's talk about like what kind of specific reform we're looking for, like besides like increasing the training. So like different types of training, or maybe even like the equipment that they're allowed to have.
Well, there are two issues I see right now. It's the lack of training in some areas. I got some blowback from people who watched my podcast, actually. I made a generalization by saying that cops aren't trained. So in Sarasota County, we do have pretty extensive training, and they have to be retrained over a specific time period. But we do see in some police districts, all you have to do is go to the academy for 3 or 6 months, and then you have no follow-up training, which is why you see like these fat cops, essentially. And they don't know how to do their job. They don't have any training in their minds because it was so long ago. And when they do get in a tussle, they act improperly. So the issue is training and recurrent training. And then the second issue with the funding, at least, is after the Iraq War and we had all this military surplus, we have the police units essentially buying the surplus with these government grants. And that enables them to use this, which leads to escalation. And then they're improperly using what little money they need to use to buy this stuff on stuff that they don't actually need.
Yeah, I do think that there needs to be more supervision on what kind of funds are allotted to different sects of the police, the sectors. Definitely, like the escalation with the different types of weapons. I think that rubber bullets, when used properly, are a better measure than actual lethal bullets. Again, they're still bullets and they're going to cause some damage, like we saw with the protesters who lost a few eyes and other injuries. But I do think that when push comes to shove and when a criminal is reaching for lethal weapons such as an actual gun, I do think that rubber bullets are the best alternative. Because when police kill someone, especially unjustly, before this whole George Floyd incident, they rarely got a lot of media attention, so the police department could sweep it under the rug with like paid administrative leave and different slaps on the wrists and stuff like that. So I do think that when police actively when they think that they are above the law and they commit crimes like killing people in the streets, they need to be held accountable. So there needs to be more oversight, especially by their own communities.
Kind of going on that, Drew, and kind of going back on something that you said, I do kind of like you agree with the reallocating of the budgets. I believe that with that, you can kind of create a better task force that emphasizes, Max, kind of piggybacking off what you said, the training of the mind, so psychological evaluations for the force. I think in terms of getting to know the community, you should be able to kind of embed officers within a family in that community so you understand its workings, its citizens, maybe on a first name basis. And I think more importantly, a more diverse kind of police force would do well. So hiring from the neighborhoods that they police, women, males of color, things like that, would I think increase the legitimacy of the force in the neighborhoods, such as that.
Yeah. And also the only problem that I really do see with like the police getting to know the neighborhood a lot better is like cities with just a huge population number where there's just too many people, that like New York City, Chicago, and these very large cities. That's the only problem, because you can't effectively know everyone in a community in that large of a city. You get me? So it's kind of like, what is that drawback? Do we institute that in more of the kind of, smaller cities, like rural towns, or do we mass institute these kinds of policies in those larger cities where we introduce more police officers to get the community a lot, more, get to know the police officers better?
I just feel that it's about understanding,
like a slippery slope, I guess.
Yeah, like understanding the dynamic. Like
Yeah.
you can't send someone in untrained, like that defeats the whole purpose of being a police officer. So if you're training them to understand where they're policing, the type of people they're policing, I guess majority of the jobs and the ethnicity and the ethnic groups that are in that neighborhood, you get them to understand, I guess, the approach they'd have to take to certain actions. And I think doing that would, again, like I said, increase the legitimacy of the force.
I think one of the issues right now, I know especially in LA, but other large cities, is we have people who are working in the police department that aren't representative of their neighborhoods, largely because the police actually don't live inside the cities. They come from the suburbs and they come from outside of like the metropolitan area, we can put it that way. And they don't have any inflection on their actions because it's not actually acting on the communities they might live in. So there have been studies on like racial and ethnic representation of the police force, but I think the best idea right now is to make sure it's like geographically at least representative, so that you are policing in the neighborhood you might live, so you have accountability for what you're doing.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, going out to like LA, so you're definitely right that a lot of those police officers aren't from the actual city. They live in the suburbs. Yeah, absolutely. LA's police force specifically is just looking from like ethnicity point and from walks of life, I should say, is that they're a whole lot more diverse than what you'll see from like the NYPD or from Chicago and from these other places, which I also think is a cool thing. But the weird thing about the LAPD is that their hiring process to begin with over the past few years has been like super, super janky. So, there weren't that many people in LA who want to be police officers to begin with. So they were basically, again, letting in everyone. And then so that's another part about, defunding the police. So when you're taking away money from it, so as you're talking about, Drew, about getting the officers to the neighborhoods and actually knowing who they're taking care of, and more training, all that requires money. And then so just like any problem in the US, we just throw money at it to solve it. And so with that being said, if there was a defunding, then it would definitely lead to less people wanting to be police officers to begin with, because you're not getting paid as well, and the pay for a police officer already it's definitely not enough compensation, I believe, for what they're supposed to be doing, for what they represent.
Brian, I feel like the word defunding and kind of how you use it isn't the right word. I want to say reallocating it to more things, to shed more money into different resources that can make policing the communities better, that could make being a policeman sound more enticing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that was it's a bad word.
Yeah, instead of like funding these, more lethal weapons, like Max said with the Iraq War, we should more put it into the actual police officers, such as raising their wages and improving their skill sets.
I think to work off what Vincent said, one of the issues we have right now is we have a movement, but we don't have a leader like we've had in previous movements. And so we have the pathos behind the protest going on, and we have like the catchwords that people are chanting. But without a leader, we don't have any proposals that the movement itself is advocating for. So when we say defund the police, they might not actually mean defund the police. They might mean reallocation and stuff like that. But without a leader, like we've seen like in other nations even, with previous movements, they aren't able to articulate what the goal is. And we have that emotion behind the movement, but we don't have as I keep going back to like the policy changes that they want. So we have to articulate that ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I'm up here in Tennessee. Actually, last Saturday, we went down to this market square, and I saw a Black Lives Matter, chapter taking a 9 minutes, 9 minutes of silence for George Floyd. So I really do think that this this kind of movement is more localized, and there's not a central figurehead. Have you guys heard of any figurehead or leader of the Black Lives Matter movement? Because
the issue is there's no real leader of BLM.
Why do we need one?
Yeah.
No, that's like a question.
Oh, I personally haven't seen like a revolution or a movement personally, I haven't seen one succeed. I'm a history buff, so I kind of I like this sort of different dynamic change. You've seen revolutions, the civil rights movement with Martin Luther. You had the socialist revolution in Russia. But I tend to compare this sort of movement kind of like the revolutions of 1847 or 48, because those revolutions who tried to implant liberal policies within monarchies of Europe, they didn't have any leader, and they pretty much, except for a few changes in Italy and some of the Balkan states, they really did not pan out to prove any effective change. And plus, people need to have some sort of figurehead to identify their movement too. It kind of like unites them. At least that's what I've seen in the vast majority of when people are trying to protest or produce a revolution.
I'm going to disagree with Drew here, because I think as opposed to previous, like you could say revolutions, I wouldn't classify this as a revolution, because it's not national level legislation that can really change this, because like the trickle down from Washington isn't really going to affect how we train at a local police department level. So the good thing about these like local chapters that might not have a leader is we have this emotion, and they're able to advocate for change at a local level, because what works for one county might not work for another county. I was listening to actually the governor of New York's, he had a press release, and he was essentially saying, we work together as a community and advocate for local change in the specific police departments, because what might work for Ithaca, New York won't work for the NYPD, and vice versa. So it's kind of unique as opposed to like revolutions. We don't really need a leader to actually instill this change. We just need to actually hear them out, the people who have the power.
Max, I agree.
I agree with that.
Yeah, it's also just like our in government and the US as a whole is like different than what you see in like Europe. Because then again, here we have like states versus national legislation. And then so you don't really see that in Europe because Europe, you have the EU and then the one party systems and all that other stuff and whatnot that we don't have here. And then so, actually I was talking about this with Max a lot in our discussion. But there's a lot of people who frankly they don't know too much about the local politics and what's happening near them. And then so there should be like more education on like what happens locally, like I'm sure most of us don't really know like who's on the panel of the police department here or who's even like the our mayor. I don't know who our mayor is here.
I don't think anyone is.
Yeah. And so I think that it's just a lot of people not really knowing too much about local politics.
I think building off that, compared to the European model, we have a much weaker central government, which was intended by the founding fathers as opposed to Great Britain. So the change that needs to be brought about, we see in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Like the things that aren't instilled in the national government are all left to the state level. So we really, as a community, need to look towards Florida, in our case, and even the powers that Florida doesn't have that they then delegate to the county level and advocate for that specific change in our community, not just at the national level.
I agree.
Yeah. I think one thing is, again, going back to like the less media coverage with Black Lives Matter and the protests is that we're seeing more coverage now about Corona. So now Corona is making headlines again. And I think Florida specifically is one of the big
county, and even around Sarasota County, all the numbers are spiking again.
Yeah. So there was a Herald Tribune article, like I think yesterday, but I was reading it and it's saying how, so Sarasota specifically, I forgot how many, basically the death toll went up like 3 or 4. There's like 3 or 4 deaths yesterday. And there was more testing. I believe it was like, we have an additional 150, I think, more cases. But what we've been seeing is that in Sarasota is that there's a 21% decrease in testing, but now we're seeing more cases from less testing. So it's like, whoa, right? And then
I was just to build off that, I was reading an New York Times article before I got paywalled, but I could read down enough to understand what it was saying. And so the CDC said it's good when you have enough tests and less than 10% of the tests are positive, which is a good thing, which means you're doing enough tests and enough people don't actually have coronavirus. The issue is right now, Florida, we were like that in May and April. But right now, we have the tests, but it's over 10% now, which means there is spread. We can't leave it to, there's increased tests, so there's more coronavirus. No. If you look at the graph, we had a first spike, and then the stay-at-home order ended, and then we have a second spike. So I think we're too rash as a community to go back out, and particularly among young people, we see like over a quarter of the people who are getting this coronavirus right now are going out into their communities and spreading it. So over a quarter are between like the ages, I think 20 and 35. So it's different from what it was before because people think we can go back to the old normal, but it's not. There is no old normal. We have a new normal, but people don't realize that.
Yeah. Like, did you guys hear about the nurse even in Jacksonville who went out to a specific bar with, I think, 5 or 7 of her friends and all tested positive?
Exactly.
Ron is interesting. So I don't know if you guys saw his statement about what he plans on, how he plans like addressing everything. Did you guys read that?
No.
Okay, Ron basically said like we're not stopping. We're gonna keep on like opening.
Ron mode.
Ron.
Ron, please.
Talking about the statement, I think someone said that if we decrease testing, we'll see less increases of a coronavirus spike, and I was like, what?
That person would be our president.
Oh,
yeah. That was like a whole thing. Like Trump was like, if we didn't do the testing, we wouldn't see the corona. Which, like, I mean, you're not wrong. But
I understand.
Yeah.
But going to like a more international front, did you guys hear about like the new Beijing outbreak of coronavirus?
Yeah.
Okay, so
we don't hear anything out of China.
we don't hear anything except that they're taking like military. They're taking military precautions. An actual quote from the what they would call mayor of Beijing, but they're only reporting 162 cases of coronavirus. So they are severely censoring how much is actually spreading, and they're blaming it on foreigners, specifically from Europe. There hasn't been an increase of travel to China from Europe, so obviously they're lying. But I just thought that was a little more telling about, China's censorship and how we should be definitely more aware and, not to let the media, spread more lies than truth and becoming more like China, especially.
Also, I feel like it's our own job to stay educated, like kind of the whole local, national, not just on a local level, not just on even a national level, but on a global level. This whole virus is on a global scale, and its effects are going to be everywhere.
Definitely. We're definitely going to see a lot more, like, I guess, consumer and educational changes due to coronavirus, because now we've kind of developed the tools to more stay at home, I guess, and do more of the jobs. So gamers rise up, I guess.
Honestly, I don't know. Okay, so going on to China, it's an interesting point you bring up about that. So Beijing, and I know this also happened in like Wuhan when like they got a few more cases again. This was a couple of weeks ago.
Just
but
a few.
yeah, no, it was like 3 cases, I believe. And what happened is that they shut down the entire city and they tested everyone. They literally went door to door and tested every single person. And then, there was quarantine again. And then, so that's like China's method and Korea's approach too with that. So, that's like
Vietnam as well.
Vietnam, yeah. The Asian countries in general, like they're handling it very, very seriously. They take it very seriously. And
it's much easier to do it in a communist dictatorship.
Well, I have a whole feeling about that. but but no, okay. But TLDR about that point is that China is actually much more capitalistic than America is. Like from an actual
they have much more central control.
Yeah, that's kind of
even if they are.
Yeah, no, but like as a society, they're
in like those specialized economic zones. I guess I can see where you're coming from, but China as a whole is still very communist. Especially in like those.
I would say it's more of a dictatorship, to be honest with you, because there's a lot more business.
An oligarchy, more than anything. With
leaders you could say that.
Driving policies.
Yeah, it's just that there's so many businesses and there's like no social net, and all of that is controlled by one person. Winnie the Pooh.
Can't say that.
Vincent, you're cutting out a little bit.
Do you guys think that they're handling it the best way possible versus all the other countries, including the United States?
I honestly think that China is handling it the best out of the world right now. Maybe their numbers are fudged, but I think honestly all the numbers are fudged. Like US numbers are fudged, European numbers are fudged, all the numbers are fudged, which shouldn't delegitimize it, I think. But like, just look at the way they're handling it. They obviously take it much more seriously than the US does currently. And there was a survey done where it asked the citizens of each country, so the US, the UK, China, all those, all the big countries, if you will, the developed countries. And they asked them if they felt that the US was doing a better job of handling coronavirus than China. And in that response, only 4 countries felt that the US was doing better than China. Those 4 countries being Korea, Japan, Vietnam, I think, and I forgot the last one, but basically everywhere bordering China.
Besides the one really obvious factor of as to why that is, like why as a country are we portraying ourselves as one of the worst prepared countries, and even like we're handling it the worst compared besides the other 4 countries. I think we're handling it pretty okay. Like, why do you think that is?
I think
like, what aren't we doing that other countries are?
Well, I think as
we're
a society,
not like physically enforcing people to be shut into their doors. I haven't heard any nationwide stories of the police heading over to a neighborhood and sealing people's doors shut
Exactly.
They were doing that in Rhode Island.
They
Oh,
were?
really?
No,
Oh.
the hippie paradise? No.
No.
You'll hear the whole argument of you're infringing on my rights. You can't keep me in here. Like,
Yeah. I want a haircut. You can't do that in the US as you can in like in those countries. And I think one issue with, with why China goes and says that like it's the foreigners who are bringing corona back is that I think one of the main causes of them saying that is like the US politicizing coronavirus as a whole. So US goes, Chinese virus, you guys brought it over to us. Oh yeah. And then China goes, no. It was the U.S. Army who brought it to us. And then so now there's like this whole like back and forth because no one wants to really be held responsible for this, right? No one wants to say like I was the one who brought it forward. And while coronavirus definitely it started spreading in Wuhan, I remember there's basically some research that's saying it didn't necessarily originate from there. But that still has yet to be like decided by the scientific community. But anyway, the point is though, is that I think with the current administration politicizing coronavirus so much, it's caused like a reef between Americans. So there's those who are wearing the masks, quarantining, practicing social distancing, whatever, and then there's there's the other party where yeah, it's a reef, okay? So and there's the other side where they're not wearing masks, they're going out, they're trying to live their normal lives, and they're like that.
Well,
Yeah,
in California, did the governor enforce that you have to wear masks outside the house? Like that's an enforced law.
right now it is. Yeah, they put that in. And it's actually so funny because Trump is going to start rallying in a few days. Yeah. And I remember because I was talking to my mom about this, and I was like,
it's tomorrow.
Oh, it's tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I was talking to my mom about this, and I was like, and she was like, "Oh, would you want to go if you ever came?" And I was like, "I might go just to like for the keks." And then she was telling me about how like, oh, there's actually like a waiver you have to sign in order to attend, and the waiver basically says, "I will not wear a mask, and the Trump campaign is not responsible if you get corona."
What?
Yeah. There's a legitimate waiver you have to sign to attend the rallies.
That says that
I don't know about the mask part.
Yeah, it says you're not allowed to wear masks. Yeah,
you're not allowed to.
Because they're trying to like enforce his narrative of it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's a hoax by the Democrats.
Masks will be optional.
As optional? Okay, yeah.
The waiver is to say that you can't sue if you do get.
Oh, it's optional.
Yeah.
That's kind of, I mean, like, I can see where they're coming from with like the waiver. It's kind of like the same thing as if you fall off a tree at Triumph. Like you're going to a place that could potentially harm you, and you're taking that risk.
But you have like a grapple and a hook, so it's like.
No, I get it. That's just like an analogy that I kind of chose. Your grapple and hook is like your mask, I guess. You can bring it. You can definitely bring it, but like at the same time, I kind of get where the Trump campaign is coming from. I personally won't attend rallies. I mean, I attend different Republican club meetings through more virtual means, especially since I'm out of state. But everybody is just saying like, we need to kind of conserve, stay at home.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
That's the main.
You said, Drew, that you agreed with what? I want to say something, but I just forgot.
I agree where the Trump campaign sent out the waiver, kind of saying like
saying that masks are optional. You agree with that?
Well, yeah, if it's in a waiver, I would prefer them to say that masks are mandatory personally, but I won't disagree with them because people are taking their own risks. And if they do want to attend a Trump rally that bad, who's to say that people can force them not to?
Okay.
To build off that, I think the rally probably should have been outside. I think that's the most logical option moving forward.
It's in a stadium,
November.
Right?
It's in an indoor stadium, but the diffusion factor of the air outside is so much greater. There was a meta-analysis of like 350 or something scenarios where there was like a spread of coronavirus, and only 2 of them were outside. They were all inside. So I think looking forward to the election, if we want to have these kinds of mega events, they should definitely be outside.
Yeah.
I
What
agree.
are the Democrat? Or what is Joe Biden?
Joe's not doing anything.
Yeah, Joe's just
Not doing
vibing, which is pretty standard of Joe. But that's a
Like
separate.
November, like think about it.
Yeah, it's like the first time, because the pandemic is going on, with the election happening so close, everything is different.
Campaign teams are trying to scramble together. I mean, I'm going to work for Eric Arroyo, a person that's going to run for District C3 for Sarasota. And we are heavily basing our campaign tactics on more phone calling, more social media to avoid door knocking and handing out flyers. So people, especially politicians at the local level, are taking into account the threat of coronavirus and the spread of it.
I guess we can just go ahead and call that a wrap. So, Max, you got any closing thoughts?
Just as a closing thought, if anyone disagrees with me, please reach out to me. I don't want to be canceled. Everyone has their own beliefs and opinions, but I feel this kind of discourse is really necessary for us moving forward as a society.
Awesome. Drew, closing thoughts.
Make sure to stay safe out there, and please wear your masks. That's all I gotta say.
Awesome. Vincent, closing thoughts.
You know what both you said, I think discourse, especially in this instance, is very important. And the fact that we seek to understand each other, I think that's another important thing that we all need to do. And please wear your mask. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone wear your masks, stay safe, and yeah.
And also check
Thank
out
you.
the Sequence of Events podcast.
Check out Sequence of Events as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to the very first tender segment of the Nuggets podcast. Your support means so much. And I hope that in listening to these different perspectives and ideas, it may have helped you think and understand more about the current issues at hand. This episode also concludes the very first month's topic. The July topic will be announced on the very first day of July. For updates on the month's topic, the podcast, and if you want to be featured on the show, go follow the Instagram at NuggetsSRQ. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to DM me on the Instagram. With all that being said, once again, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you have a great day and stay safe out there, everyone.